All right, we're live. We're on time for once. So are we on time? What time is it?
201.
Oh, 2:01. Not bad. I was in the middle of doing a garage design video, and it was getting really good, and it was about to be an hour long. So I'm like, James is sitting here waiting for me. So let's go. We'll come back. We'll finish the garage design video. But you're getting a glimpse. I'm sure your life is probably pretty similar, where it's just
Crazy.
yeah,
All the time.
one thing after another. So, James, do we say from Active? You own Active, right?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, so stay on the mic so they can hear you. So James was visiting. We have this little beauty here. No BS, no frickin' sales pitch. This is going to blow your minds. Like in this like 350-ish, give or take, depending on, we'll figure out pricing as when production hits in the next few weeks. But this thing is like this is the thing I was hoping that I would find when I tested every pressure washer. I'm like, okay, this one's going to do something different. No, this Greenworks is the same as that. Greenworks is the same as that. Karcher is the same as all. The Karcher was the first one. I'm like, I could deal with this. I could work with this. And then the Active was the VE52 was like, oh, this thing is like great performance.
Right.
But it's still, it was the best of, what you'd come up with for mass market.
Right.
Now this is tailored to what we want to do.
Right.
And it's incredible. I'm going to save that. We won't get into the numbers. I'll save that for the video. I hate teas and stuff. Chris knows this. I'm not very good at, Chris is on the mic over here for questions. So if you have questions, he'll pull them up here. But James and I are going to talk a little bit about life and business. But I did want to preface that you're going to want to watch the Active 2.0 video. It looks great. It's compact. They solved all the issues like having a plastic inlet, the inlet and outlet are in the appropriate spot, and the performance is insane. Absolutely insane. And lots of you'll have quite a bit of range of ability that we found out today in our testing. You have a lot of ability range if you're getting. James cringes when I start modifying this stuff, but you have a range of adjustability depending on the conditions of the power that you have and the water coming in and things like that. So you'll be able to dial in a little more pressure, a little less flow,
right,
or a lot of flow. And my favorite, right around 1,000 psi, which is what I like. Which is, I'm telling. So what we're gonna do, I think, I'm gonna sell it with like a 6-pack of nozzles because you may want to use it for different things.
That's right.
It's gonna be pretty cool. So let's rewind back. I want to talk to, if you're willing to share. You have a lifetime of experience of manufacturing. And making various products. You feel free to share, as much as you're comfortable. But you and I, the first time we met, were like standing. I think my feet started hurting.
Yeah.
We were just standing there, just talking about life and business. And I figured we could do the same thing here on the podcast. I think we're similar in age, and we have similar family or similar stage in life and family. But you have a lot of experience in manufacturing overseas.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit. Give us like the 5 or 10 or however long it takes that's sort of your background story of how do we get to this Active thing? What does that have to do with you, and how does that happen?
Right. So I've always been involved in kind of product manufacturing and development and design, but primarily for mass retailers. So if you go back 20 years, there's no direct-to-consumer, there's no online, there's no kind of niche brands. All businesses were really through mass market channels for the majority of things, right? Like you couldn't go on Amazon and buy something. You had to go to your local Lowe's or Walmart or whatnot, or your distributor, right?
Yep.
So I think the method of building products and then the scrutiny of a mass retailer. So, when you build something for Walmart, it's going to have a lot of requirements as it relates to, standards and labor laws and how it's designed. And then, of course, the biggest thing is it has to hit a certain price, as we've talked about a lot. And so I think that type of discipline around how do you build products to hit a certain price point, but still try to satisfy quality levels and consumer requirements and so forth. That's kind of what I did for a long time. And that was, in the beginning, it was an automotive company, so we were doing hydraulic jacks and air compressors and polishers. And then in the early 2000s, started a company to build outdoor cooking products, which is existing today. And then around 2006, we started building ourselves pressure washers. So we'd been what you call a trading model before that. So we'd been basically buying pressure washers from different sources in China at the time. If you go back to the early 2000s, the majority of pressure washers in North America were brought in by Karcher and a company called Fipe, who both obviously are still around today. And they were primarily built in Italy. All of the units were built in Italy. So the opportunity for retailers back then was to really gain a lot of margin and import them from China, typical across so many different product categories. The problem was at the time, the quality was terrible. You're talking about 25-30% return rates, just because, they didn't know what they were doing. They were basically copying machines without really understanding what they were copying. And so they were tripping breakers, they were leaking. It was just terrible. And so we had been requested by one of our customers in Canada, Canadian Tire, to import them from China. We did. Huge quality disaster. And then basically around 2006-07, we decided we needed to kind of consolidate our manufacturing to one place. So we had a joint venture partnership in China to build a ground-up factory with our partners, and they built the factory, and really kind of just then began to pay attention to how to get the quality better, how to design product. But again, at that time, it was all still for retail. So it was all still for people like Canadian Tire or for Home Depot and things like that. So it wasn't really consumer facing in that sense. It was building for brands. And then the way we got to this product, or the way we got to the V52, is just before, I guess, 2019, 2020, we all decided, I think this direct-to-consumer thing is interesting. We'll be able to get more feedback from the customer. So we launched the V52, which was based off of a unit we'd already been selling at Canadian Tire.
Yeah, the Simonized that people,
That's right.
all you Canadians, you're all familiar with.
That's right.
People would always send it to me. You got to check this thing out. It's just a Simonized. I'm like, oh, it doesn't do me any good. I can't get it.
Right. It's so I mean, and so we build all of the Simonized product in Canada. And we get messages about the stuff is terrible and it's bad and so forth, and it's different than the active, and I can tell them it's not. It's the same. But in any case. And so that was kind of our first experience building direct-to-consumer product, which was super exciting because we got direct feedback. As we talked about, we saw firsthand how users were modifying the product, which created problems that we didn't anticipate.
You're talking about when I took on
when you caused us problems.
Right.
No, but I think it was all great learning, right? Because it was really kind of getting closer to the customer and understanding how they were using the product, and then what we had to do as a manufacturer to kind of react to that and cater to those needs.
Because at Canadian Tire, they're not doing any of this. You retail relationship. Like you go to Walmart and you buy a Ryobi or whatever. You're not changing the orifice and using a foam cannon.
No.
You're in most cases they buy it, use it once on their deck, realize it doesn't really work very well, and it sits in the corner of the garage.
Yeah, and we always have to understand, and you understand this, that the majority of people buying this product, the vast majority of people buying this product, they're going to use it out of the box.
Right.
It'll be what it is, and they're not concerning themselves with maximum, foam efficiency or orifice size this and so forth. So
and the reason the warranty works is because they don't use them very much.
Right.
They most of the time don't even know it had that long of a warranty.
That's right.
Right. And so the 3-year Sunjo unlimited warranty, they're just doing numbers.
Right.
And so the vast majority of people have thrown it away before they ever even realized that it had this crazy warranty.
Yeah, and all that is built into the cost, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
Whether it's Sunjo or ourselves or another company, when they're doing the workup on the product, they will anticipate what it's going to cost them for what you call a cost of quality or cost of after sales or returns. And it's all built into the cost.
Sure.
So, and that depends on retailer too. So typically somebody like a Costco who has a much more generous return policy, all vendors know to build in or to account for a much higher return rate than somebody else. The product can be identical, right?
Yeah.
So it really has nothing to do with the quality of the product, but really it's about how customers are using it, and then
And that's oftentimes why a manufacturer will create, it'll be like a 2223 instead of a 2224. It's the same model.
Right.
It's just they create a new model number because it probably has a different pricing structure for a different retailer.
That's right. So there's a lot of things when you're dealing with retail that don't necessarily have anything to do with the product itself.
Mm-hmm.
How it's built, how it's costed, how it's designed, how it's spec'd. A lot of times it has to fit into an architecture within the category. So it may not necessarily make sense for the product, but it makes sense for their retail floor,
Right.
or how their assortment is set up.
Yep.
Or you may add or strip away features just because you have to hit that $199 price point, and they're going to put it on promo, and they need to make this much margin and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that actually has nothing to do with the product.
But anybody, like someone like myself, I'm not in the pressure washer. Well, I kind of am now, but
Right.
I'm not in the manufacturing business. I could see that. You could see, okay, here's what they're doing. So here's what Karcher does with the 1700, the 1800, the 1900, the 2000.
Right.
They're all based on the same design with a little bit of different, tweaks to the whatever the internal structure of the pump, and they're hitting a price point.
Right.
And so what I set out to do in the very beginning was, everybody's asking me what fittings did they need, and then I wasn't sure, some pressure washers would have 15 millimeter on the outlet and 14 on the gun. And,
Right.
and so I wanted to compile a database of the performance, the real performance.
Right.
So that way people can make an educated decision. And then really what I wanted to do was just sell fittings. I was selling a lot of fittings. There's a lot of margin in fittings.
Right.
And fittings were not a thing when I was
No.
doing it. No one was doing quick disconnects. And so this study turned into, I was actually pleasantly surprised. Now, the performance wasn't great. The one Karcher that I ended up taking on was 1.2 gallons per minute.
Right.
And it's what it actually produced.
Right.
Or it was rated at 1.2, it did 1.4. And 1.4 I thought for $150 was an acceptable output. I could get foam, we could get the stuff done. And so it changed my whole business model of, I recognized that the 20-year-old Matt wasn't buying a Krensla.
Right.
A 20-year-old Matt wasn't buying an AR. It just wasn't happening. And so that's when I sort of came up with this idea, well, how does this fit my whole methodology, which is I only want the best.
Right.
And I don't want to have a retail model where I'm just selling the 1700, 1800, the 1900, 2000 to try to hit every price point. And at least the way I justified it to myself was, well, there are progressions in life.
Yeah. 100%.
And so what you and I have spent a lot of time talking about is, well, yes, we understand these progressions. How could we maximize inside of a certain step within that progression? And that's where this puppy comes in.
Right. And so I'll say a couple things. One, I think you have a ton to do with our ability to do something like this. And I say that because, through a traditional retail channel, they are not concerned typically around, call it the optimal product performance, whatever that looks like. In
fairness to them, their customers aren't going to test it.
Yeah,
right?
and they're in an environment where you got to walk across the aisle, and then how do you select? You select by brand or PSI, and it's a very quick selection or price point, right?
Yep.
And so I think the amount of testing that you've done across all brands and kind of shining a light on that has educated consumers to say things like, hey, I think the GPM, I think this is important, or
Right.
hey, I could change the fitting and adjust the flow, or I can do all this stuff. And so I think when you arm consumers with that information, and I think from a very impartial kind of view, the way you did it, because you were just testing every brand, I think it helped customers understand the category better, which gives us license to then come out with something like this that, on purpose, we didn't even market it with a PSI rating.
Yeah.
Because I think the informed customer is going to know the pressure is going to be enough, right? Especially as we've talked about from an electrical system, it's not gas. The pressure is going to be enough for most of your tasks around the home. You really want to be concerned about what flow you're getting at an adequate amount of pressure. So honestly, I do think that you had a big part in educating the masses on pressure washers.
Well, when I started dabbling in it, like I'd get like a hint from a commenter, and they'd say something about like an orifice size. I'm like, I'd always assumed that a pressure washer, there was just a valve and you could adjust pressure from from the the pump head or something, and that's not really, that's an unloader. It's not really what that's designed to do.
Right.
And so then when I started learning about, well, okay, there's an orifice, and then there's a calculation there.
Right.
And then it made a lot of sense to me because I come from the audio world where you want current,
Right.
not just wattage.
Yes.
You don't want the most watts, you want the most current.
Right.
And of course nobody rates current.
Right.
And so you could almost just go dollar for current. The more dollars you spend, the higher current
Right.
your amplifier is going to be. And that most of the wattage numbers were nonsense. The beauty of a pressure washer is I could stick the tip in a bucket
Right.
with a stopwatch and figure it out. And so that really kind of got me going. Now, when I first started doing this, I just assumed that Krensla is fancy. It's
Right.
really expensive. It weighs 80 pounds. The pump head looks beautiful. I put my hand in front of it and said, this feels pretty good. So it's good to go. So to me at that time, pressure didn't matter.
Right.
What I was getting frustrated with is once I started selling Krenslas, I'm like, this stuff is nonsense. These ratings that they're using. And then as I got more into it, I'm recognizing, well, it's not really nonsense. It's a game.
Right.
It's just the way the game has been set up.
That's right.
And so now I think what I'm hoping that my platform is allowing us to do, and then us working together, is to go and to start to build things that make sense
Right.
in the real world, not on the retail shelf.
Yeah.
And that's what this is.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of it. And I think, if I was to take this to a retailer traditionally and say, hey, you should sell it, and it's only can be rated at, let's say, 1800 psi or 1700 psi, and you got to sell it for $350, and it doesn't have any hose management, what they like to say.
Right.
Doesn't have a cord reel,
No soap tank. Right.
the first question will be, where's the wheels?
Right.
Which is fine, because again, those questions are in response to how the category has been built over time.
It's the feature add-on. What
Right.
is the feature that adds additional value that
Right.
then I could attach a retail price to?
Right, exactly.
Where in our world of what do you call us? We're a niche.
Yeah.
But in our world of product lovers, if you will,
Yes.
less oftentimes is more. Think about cars that we buy. The cars with less options are worth more.
Yeah.
To the average person, it's got to have navigation. It's got to have parking. Like, I don't want parking distance control because I don't want the little circles on
That's
my
right.
bumper. So that car, to us, like an E92 M3, if it's a single hump car, it's worth more.
Right.
And so to us, to the informed consumer,
Right.
a lot of times it's worth more.
Yeah, and like I always like to tell people too, there's no magic in this, right? If you have, let's say, taking an arbitrary number, $100 to spend, you can spend it on all those additional hose reels and gadgets and holders and wheels and brackets and all that stuff, or you can spend it on the product to improve product performance. But then there's no magic, so then I have less budget to spend on all that other stuff.
Right.
So it really depends on how you communicate that to the customer, what the customer values, because there is going to be the homeowner that does want the hose reel, the cord reel,
Right.
wants to store it in his garage and wants it to look neat and tidy, and that's all they care about, and that's fine, and there's a product for them.
Yep.
For that purpose. This is really trying to cater to somebody else, and again, I think on a typical retail floor it might not do so well because it just doesn't look like anything else.
So let's back up a bit. How does because this has, just to bring everybody up to speed, I've talked about this a ton, there's a plate. It's called the wobble plate.
Wobble plate.
And there's a shaft that runs down the middle of the electric motor and
Right.
electric mining, and there's a plate. And the reason why it's called a wobble plate is because it moves like, you guys are watching me on camera. If you're listening on the podcast or listening audio, that plate has a long side or a fat side and a skinny side, let's
Right.
say. And so it's and when it turns, it runs up against plungers, like
That's
think
right.
of a piston.
Correct.
When there's a spring on there. And so the reason reason why this machine can do what it does is you've developed a technology, or you have a patent.
That's right.
On the manufacturing process and of turning this. It's just called a radial axial pump.
Right.
So it's a shaft with a plate. This has 5 plungers, where all other pressure washers that are radial axial have 3.
Right. There's a couple out there that actually have 4, and I think there may be a couple. There may be a couple that have toyed around with more or just different configurations, but there's technical reasons why we landed on 5 when we were doing our testing, and that has to do with a combination of, surface area to pressure to size to how much energy can be used to drive the pump. Mm-hmm. And I'll back up a little bit to give everyone even more detail. So, I'll give credit. So one of the people we work with at Canadian Tire, this has got to go back 6 years ago. He challenged us to, how do we build a better pressure washer? And of course, the standard concept would be, well, you got to increase the power. So what everybody did and has been doing was, okay, how do we increase the output of the motor? So you see like the digital motors of the Greenworks. I think Ryobi has a digital motor unit as well. We did as well. And that requires a giant circuit board and it's a brushless motor. You have higher efficiency, so you're able to squeeze out more power. But there's a limit there, and those motors were frighteningly expensive.
Yeah.
Okay?
And they're heavier.
And they're heavier, and it's just a bigger unit. So we kind of looked at it and said, well, why don't we focus on the pump and see what we can do with the pump? And so we started really prototyping and testing a bunch of different designs, and different piston configurations. You change the angle of the wobble plate. That'll also give you different characteristics. But the 5-piston really came about with that idea of how do you get better performance. And we'd already been going down the path of better performance within electric really meant more flow. It did not mean more pressure, right? So we had already been going down that path on how we would achieve a better balance between pressure and flow.
Forget washing cars, just in general.
Yes, and then I was telling the team, I said, it's funny, a lot of people think that these units with high flow are ideal and best for washing cars. I would say no. I would say it's only because the biggest enthusiasts of pressure washers happen to be in auto detailing.
Right.
So the unintended consequence is people think this is only ideal for washing cars, when in reality, the high flow with adequate pressure actually helps you clean anything better and faster, right? So it just happens to be we're on an automotive focused kind of segment or consumer base, but the reality is around the house, this is the best combination of pressure and flow to help you clean anything better and faster. If you do need more pressure than an electric can provide, then you need a gas unit. Plain and simple.
For example, you need a lot of pinpoint spot pressure to remove paint off a deck, or
that's right.
25-year-old graffiti off a wall or something.
That's right. And
just bag the whole concept of you're going to do this with an electric pressure washer.
Because there's simply not enough power out of a typical wall socket to drive the required amount of pressure with water. So you could create a system that created a ton of pressure. So let's say a 3,000 PSI unit, but it'd be like a laser stream of water. So you would spend maybe 7 days trying to clean graffiti off a wall because you'd be going a millimeter at a time. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why I said for most household applications, you want that balance of pressure and flow, because more water is going to move more debris, is going to move more dirt, is going to move more of whatever, given that the pressure is enough. So again, if you're running over 900,000 PSI, that's more than enough pressure for most applications.
And that is when we're saying at 900,000 PSI, we're talking about like the pressure coming out, not the pump head pressure, which is how they measure most of this stuff.
That's right. So when you see a pressure washer, at Home Depot or Lowe's, and it's rated at 2,000, 2,500, or on Amazon, all that crazy stuff that's rated at 3,000 PSI for electric, that's all fake. That is, I can categorically say that's all not true, meaning none of the pressure you're receiving out of the end of the gun is going to be over 2,000 PSI, 2,500 PSI. It's not even possible. what they're measuring is the internal pump pressure or the maximum pump pressure that the pump reaches internally. And that's how they're rating the unit. But that has nothing to do with the actual performance of the unit at the end of the gun. So it's a bit of a marketing game that's been played. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of customers shop that way. I don't blame them because it looks like, you know, you're buying like horsepower, right? This thing's got 1,000 horsepower. Great. Well, it's got 2 pounds foot of torque. Can't move you anywhere, right? Well, that's kind of the exact analogy, if you think about it. And that's how they've been tuning these things, because that's how they sell.
And that's why Obsessed Garage has worked. I've done the opposite, and filling another. By the way, it's a much smaller void, right? Very few people care what we care about, in the grand scheme of people. Now, the very few people multiplied by a lot of people is a lot of people, you know, or a decent amount of people. And so my chase has always been to do it a little differently, in that I do care about these things. I want to understand those things. So when I am going to invest and buy a pressure washer, now I don't think it makes as much sense, no matter where you're at. I don't think it makes as much sense to buy, say, a Karcher $130 pressure washer and spend 2 weeks researching. But I think it did make sense to me at the time to spend 2 weeks researching for a $1,200 Krenslow.
Agreed.
You know, and so what I feel like I've been able to help the world with is, okay, I'm going to put the research into the $130 pressure washer, because then I can spread that time, the value set, over, you know, thousands of sales of pressure washers. And so hence our whole thing is born, and now we've created a whole movement of people that do care. So now something like this that can exist.
Correct.
So we take the 5 plunger design, the traditional radial axial pump. You take a lower cost pump made overseas that's sealed.
That's right.
So it's not a serviceable unit,
correct,
like a Krenslow would.
Correct.
And we get in a price point that's, you know, somewhere around double an entry-level machine.
That's right.
But we're getting performance. Now, we're not going to get performance for 20 years out of this thing, likely. But we're getting performance that can be, because of your willingness to chase new tech. We're getting performance better than the best of the best.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You know, I think why a company like Krenslow can go out and sell $1,500 machines is because they don't have to chase spec, right?
It's not on a retail shelf anywhere.
They rely on their network to promote it, to sell it. They rely on their brand, and it is a quality machine. And they're able to build it that way because they don't have to chase spec. They don't, like, nobody's requiring them to hit 2,000 psi, and they know it's nonsense anyway. So they're able to design and build their product that way, and that's kind of the approach we're trying to take here too, right? Is to say, if we're to remove a lot of the requirements put to us by the market, so not having to do, like, not worried about, oh, we're rating it under 2,000 psi, or we don't have a gun rack for this where people can store their pressure washer gun, or you know, things like that. Once you free yourself from that, it goes back to, again, then we have more money to invest in where it actually counts.
The thing that matters to the niche, the small audience. Now, what we're very likely going to see is the ability to change an industry completely.
Yeah, I mean,
it's very possible.
This is stuff. You know, this is stuff that I like to build as well, right? I mean, like, you know, I'd prefer to build stuff that works well, that doesn't have as many frills or unnecessary things. Now, it doesn't mean that stuff doesn't have a place, because like I said, there's a lot of homeowners and purchasers out there that are going to value that stuff, and that's perfectly valid. But in terms of what I would like to buy or what I would like to build, of course, it's closer to something like this.
Yeah, I probably don't say this as much as I should, but it's not invalid to be average.
Right.
Right. It's actually much more common to be average. I tend to, this is probably out of insecurity, I tend to devalue average and overvalue above average, you know, or eccentric. It's not even above average, just eccentricity, being different, because when you are different, the only way to justify your difference is to value it more than average.
I tell you, it's very funny you say that, because I have almost the opposite problem. I overvalue average because in my life, mass appeal means success at mass retail. So I've talked to my team a lot about this, saying, we have to almost jump out of our box to build something like this, because too often we've been conditioned over 20 years to look at something like this and say, oh, is it going to sell? It doesn't have wheels. Oh, it's not going to appeal to this guy or that guy. So it's really funny, because it's almost the opposite, where I sometimes default too much to worrying about how many people this is going to appeal to.
And I worry so much that if it appeals to too many, then I won't like it anymore, right? You know what I'm saying?
Really,
I just, like, I'll give you an example. When I'm 13, Green Day Dookie came out. I was already a Green Day fan prior to the Dookie album coming out. My sister, who's 3 years younger than me, we both got the Dookie album for Christmas. And it just made, like, well up with anger and disdain that I was my band.
You have to share it.
Yeah, with the masses,
right?
And so that made me not like it anymore. You know what I'm saying, Chris?
Like, definitely.
And so that's part of what that's part of an entrepreneur. That's part of.
No, but I mean, it's funny because like that disdain of the average, let's say, is what I think OG has been built on, right? Let's be honest, right? That kind of point of view, that kind of strict point of view that you have on everything, is what people want to hear and see more of, right?
The thing that I've learned, like with the advent of me chasing progressive steps and products, is that my disdain is not better.
Right.
It's not better.
Yeah, it's just
and
different.
So the reason why an Obsessed Garage, or that I can exist in a world, is because I can create something different,
right,
that fills a void that doesn't exist. Otherwise, then I get into the retail shelf battle, right? The battle. And that isn't better. In fact, in many ways, it's worse.
It's just different.
It's just different.
It's just
right?
different.
And when I recognized that, I don't know when it was, at what point, and I was always fighting with people online. And I even like take a look at my YouTube channel. If I would chase views and shut my mouth and get my ugly face off the camera more often and cut it down and do donuts in my GT3, I could chase, kind of like if you're chasing retail volume,
right,
I'd chase numbers, and humans
That's right.
appeal to everybody.
That's right.
What does everybody want? But that gives me the vomit feeling, And
Yeah.
so I'm chasing a more engaged,
right,
very specific
yeah,
relationship with as many people as I can,
right.
but that also precludes me from being and chasing and being available to everybody and be average,
Right,
if you will.
and we've talked about it. I do think there is art and science and beauty to being able to manufacture and design product at a very low price point that doesn't disappoint a lot of people.
Yes.
And that can appeal to a lot of people and does right by a lot of people and makes it accessible. I think there's a real beauty to that, and that's why I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily better to build like niche product or worse. It's just different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because I do think, like not everybody has $1,500 to spend on not even everyone has $400 to spend on a pressure washer, right? Some people are really down at the $100 level, and I think the game at mass that we've always tried to play is, no matter what the price point is, try to get everybody the best product you can, right? And that's it. And like I said, I think there's a real art to that for sure.
So this diverts from the, my methodology. The Obsessed Garage methodology is build it what it needs to be, and then we figure out what that costs.
Right.
The problem with that is then you end up with $3,000, $5,000, or $10,000 things.
Right.
And then that eliminates 99.9% of the people.
Sure.
And it really motivates me to do that. Not out of that whole Green Day example,
right,
but more out of, I feel like then we have something great. Then the total opposite of that would be to build specifically to a price point. I have $130 to spend. This is what I'm going to make. Now, this machine is a hybrid. It's in between. It's not built to a price point, but it's built with price in mind, right?
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
It's built the best it can be with some decisions made along the way that, yes, we could add this, but then that adds $75 and takes it to $500. So what could we, instead of adding that $70 part, we're not going to do the $10 part that the built to a price point has. Maybe we choose the $30 part that then takes it to the level that it's at.
I'll give you a good example. As I mentioned in the video, the starting point for this product was actually longevity and not performance, right? So when we were kind of mapping that out, one of the things that we learned from the Kranzler unit, they have ceramic pistons in theirs, okay, which are very, very expensive. The incremental benefit of ceramic pistons was not justifiable given the price point and the fact that this is not serviceable.
Right.
Okay. So that's a good example of we could have done better, but you have to make decisions and go, is it going to be worth it for the average customer because you're trying to build it, right? So there's countless decisions like that along the way. So I would never be one to say this is the best unit that you can build and this is the best of all time. I can give you 20 examples of where we could have done much better, but then it would also not be at the price point it's at.
And that's why I need you, because I am not able to do that, right? I'm not able to make that decision. I just need you to show me what it could be,
right?
Because you know what, I'm going to load it up, and it's going to be $2,800,
right? Well, again, and I think it's fine either way, but it just kind of speaks to, I guess, the different starting points that you and I kind of come from, right?
Yeah,
And I'm trying to move more towards where you are.
And I'm coming to where, and that's when we can collaborate and make something really great.
It's kind of a neat place to be, because like I said, I don't think we could sell a product like this without somebody like yourself telling people that they should focus on things like performance, or you can vary the flow and the pressure by using various tips, and you should have 4 or 5 of them depending on what you want to do, and so forth and so forth. That is not a message that can typically be conveyed on a box in a store, right? Or nor would anybody care.
Or it would require hundreds of hours of training for salespeople that are, and then the price goes way up because then you have to commission them
all that stuff. All that stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a great example. I'm happy with it. Is it the ultimate expression of what we can build? Absolutely not. Everyone has to understand, whether it's $100 or $500 or $1,000, there are tons of design, manufacturing, engineering, material compromises and choices made all the way
in order to make something that's realistic.
Yeah, or again, in order to adhere to what your original design objective was. Right?
Yeah.
So as I told you, we have different products coming down the pipe where we will make different product decisions as well, right? So, for example, we could have made the pump out of brass, which would have increased the life, which would have helped it against freezing, which would have had all these additional benefits, but would have been crazy expensive.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it can't be done. It just wouldn't have made sense. Now, would that make sense if we're going to build a machine that's $1,000? Maybe.
Sure.
Right? And if we can do it at a cost that's valuable to people, then why not? Right? But again, those are the types of things that people need to understand, that, with the best available information, we try to make the best choices when it comes to products.
I don't know how to ask this question, but there's nothing in this price point, really. I mean, there's some of these weird induction, these digital motors and stuff like that. But there's nothing like, there's a void.
Right.
There's like the $250, and then you go to the professional type pumps. Like they start at AR at like $550, $600.
The Comets, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so there's nothing in that. So there's the Italian and the German-made stuff.
Right.
With some Asian parts put in it.
Oh, for sure.
But there's never been, and this is what I railed against for so long until I realized it just physically didn't exist. There's nothing like this in the world, in this price. There are things that are $350, but not like, they're weird. They got some weird thing going on.
And I can tell you, because I've done it for sure, a lot of those things end up that way because they're cobbling together parts, or they're adapting other price point units down or up to try to fill a void, you know? So for example, you know, like you're saying, the units that are on the market for $300, $400 today, they have big induction motors, let's say. They market themselves as semi-professional.
They have, like, you have to hold the trigger for 30 seconds for it to build pressure.
Well, that is the digital motor I was talking about.
Right.
Right. So those things are all, you know, kind of just about building a product architecture, in my opinion, less about focused on what is the actual result of the unit.
So where I was going with this question is, you know, Krensla, let's use them as an example, the family's been making pressure washers for 80 years or 100 years. Let's say you didn't have that to reverse engineer. Like, you didn't have one, you couldn't see one.
Right.
But you do know how to make a great machine, you know,
Right.
and through manufacturing and, you know, overseas.
Yeah.
What value? So let's say you made a $1,300 machine, and
Right.
the Krensla's a $1,300 machine. So the Krensla has 80 years of expertise and learning. You know, this spring needs this coating on it, you know, that they find from all the data that they've gathered from selling. Versus you make a $1,300 machine that has, you know, we using the latest tech, because Krenza is going to be reluctant to go and just revamp every year because they spent so much time building the first machine, just like you would. How much value do you place on that time and that expertise of, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80 years? Can you beat a German, an AR Blue? Can you beat them at their own game with just being willing to be progressive in chasing new ideas and new things? Or is there, we always talk German, is there German engineered 100 years of family data gathered, is that unbeatable?
Interesting question. I would say that, first of all, say there is absolutely value in 70, 80 years of history.
But there's also a laziness.
Right.
Or let's not call it laziness. It's a bad word. There's a complacency that comes from that.
And that's why we have this word disruption, right? Like, incumbents are always likely to be disrupted because they don't want to change the status quo.
Right.
And they're unwilling to invest or reinvest or disrupt or kill their golden goose, right?
Yeah.
And that's how disruption happens.
It frustrates the heck out of me.
But that's exactly what it is across different industries. Let's not pick on Kranzla, right?
Terrible.
Right. It's everybody. So there is value to that legacy of 80 years of manufacturing experience, 80 years of stable supply chain, of, you know, know-how and so forth. That being said, you know, I think once a product is on market and, you know, there are so many tools now, whether it's consumer feedback or just buying stuff from reverse engineering, there's so many tools now that you can learn a lot of what's in that product in terms of what was built in it. And so I think absolutely I think there is the opportunity to beat something like a Kranzla or anything. It just takes time and focus, and it takes, I would also say, you probably need to break some manufacturing paradigms. And when I say that, this is what I mean. We found in not only developing this product, but many others, there's just certain components and parts in the supply chain that aren't available in the Far East. You know, you might need to then go and buy the same fitting from Switzerland in order to reach that same tolerance level. You might need to go and buy that seal from Germany or Japan or whatnot to get to that same quality. It's just not available in your own current supply chain. And all that does is it obviously then makes the cost go higher. But again, if the objective is to reach or exceed that quality level, sometimes that's what you just have to do.
And then what happens, I think, oftentimes is then it becomes priced significantly higher than the incumbent.
Or what happens is I think the gap isn't big enough to show value. I was talking to your team outside and saying, let's say the Kranza, for argument's sake, is $1,500, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say Active came out with a product that was as good or better, right? Let's say there was a 15% performance premium. Let's say we were better by 15% in terms of performance, but we were the same price. I personally don't think that's enough to sway people from buying the Kranza. That's my personal opinion.
I think you're right.
I think you almost in the beginning, you have to have both. You have to have a bit of a performance premium and you have to have a value story. So I think the dynamic changes if you are a 15 or 20% better performer and you're selling for $200, $300 less. I think then you have a story to try to convince people that they should take a chance on your product, or you are call it a valid replacement for a Kranza. And I think you build equity and credit over time. And that's, I think, the 80 years you're talking about. I don't think you just come out of the box and say, oh, we're as good as Kranza. Here you go and buy it. I just don't think that's reasonable.
But you're lying to people. Yeah, you're not being honest.
You're not, right? And I think that's I don't think that's good. And so I think it's better to be, here's our approach to building the product. Here's where we are as good, what we think, like performance specs and usage and so forth. And here's where we're not as good. It's not going to last as long. You can't service it, X, Y, Z and so forth. And I think that's fine. I think customers accept that because as long as you're upfront with them and say, this is the price you're paying. If you have $1,500, $5,000 to spend, be my guest, right? That's great.
Yep.
That's great. And I think that's, like you said, I think there's customers at every price point.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I struggle with and where I'm getting to, because I've been curating products since I started doing this, and I've been really curating products my whole life, which I know you do that in your life as well, and many of the people listening to this and watching this do. And I've had Obsessed Garage has basically become rocket fuel for my consumerism, my desire for products, my love of things, and the pursuit of those things. And what I'm starting to get to, because of the rocket fuel that Obsessed Garage has added for me, I'm starting to get to the point where I've reached the ceiling of what exists. And so now I'm getting to the point where I'm, working with people like yourself to say, hey, this is what exists. Here's what I would like to exist.
Right.
Now let's go and chase it. Let's go and make it. And the thing I'm so torn on is, the thing I don't fully comprehend is, do you convince the incumbent with the massive expertise?
Mm-hmm.
Do you spend your energy convincing them that it's time, or do you go and do it new? Because that's been one of the struggles. And I just think it depends on the company. Some old companies are willing to use their influence and leverage to innovate, and some aren't. And so that's been a really interesting thing for me to start to figure out as we make this, because I think Obsessed Garage is going to make this transition from, I had to build out the product line, I had to build out the vision.
Right.
Now that's almost built. So now I get to do the fun stuff, which is to go and we get to develop and chase things with, in most cases, I don't know how to manufacture squat. And so it makes more sense to partner on things. And so I'm really excited for the future and what can exist because of I think a movement of people that understand what, like, we would be speaking, no pun intended, Chinese here, several years ago in the pressure washing game.
Right.
If we were having this conversation,
right,
no one would believe it, no one would care about it, no one would know what we were talking about.
Right.
And I think that just by talking about it ad nauseum, and then the real positive is there have been other competitors, other retailers say, oh shoot, this guy's making some money, there's an opportunity there. It's frustrating for me, but it's also helped move the marketplace quite a bit by there being competitors and competition inside of this particular arena.
Yeah, and I think all that activity ends up growing the market, right?
Rising tide.
Yeah,
right?
and you'll get your fair share. You'll get your fair share of it if you do the work, right?
Yeah.
And that's all we can do, right? Because you can't really stop people and you shouldn't stop people from entering the market and doing
Mm-hmm.
what they do. And like I said, you just do your stuff and try to get your fair share of
Yeah.
the market.
So let's way back up. How does this happen to you? Like, how did you grow up? Like, how do you get into manufacturing things? Was it a good career choice? Was it family? Like, how do you end up doing what it is you now do?
It was an extended family business that I grew up in. So that was the automotive business. And that one, when I was growing up, my dad was, call it one of the salespeople in North America, selling hydraulic jacks and air compressors to people like Kmart and Sears and that kind of stuff. And that was mainly manufacturing out of Taiwan at the time. And then in the 90s, that transitioned, as many things did, moved from Taiwan to China.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I graduated university, I started by, calling on people like Canadian Tire and then eventually like Kmart and helping out.
So was he like the importer of the product, or was he a manufacturer's rep?
Yeah, kind of like a manufacturer's rep, but it was an extended family. So it was actually on my mom's side of the family,
Mm-hmm.
and so he would be.
But it was a business, and that they owned the rights.
Yeah, they'd own the rights. They'd own the rights to it. The company was the actual manufacturer.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just purely trading, which is the word of, let's say, buying from multiple factories
Yeah.
and putting a brand on it. It was the actual manufacturer. So that's really kind of where I learned, how to impact things on a product level, how to put together programs for retailers.
But your dad didn't punch a clock.
No.
There was a clock that just kept running infinitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of kind of one of these things where you learn, especially when we deal with retail, you're under review every year, right? Your business is put up for review almost every year.
Yeah.
So you better keep innovating, better stay sharp, better keep your service levels high, all that stuff.
So you had a model where it wasn't about, well, how much vacation time do I
No.
get? How, when do I come in and when do I punch out? It was you do what you need to do. Sometimes it means you don't have to do anything because you did a lot.
That's right. That's right.
So you had that sort of entrepreneur model.
Yeah, and my father passed away when I was 18. So after university and a little bit during, I had to work. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to jump in and work in the company. A little bit when I was in university, and then directly after I graduated. So that was my first 5-6 years after university.
How did you think about college? Like when you went to university, what did you go in as a major? What was the goal?
Oh, I didn't have a goal. In high school, I think like a lot of people, I grew up really, I had a really, just nice upbringing, right? And in my last year of high school is when my dad got sick.
Mm-hmm.
So up to that point, I just wanted to go be an engineer, move out of Toronto, which is where I live.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to go away for university, just to get away, of course, like everyone. And then when he got sick and passed away, that's when I moved back to decided to go to school in Toronto. Just took whatever courses I could. So I really had no plan or thought for university at that point. I think I was in the mode of, well, I got a few years left to get a degree, and then I got to start working.
So when you're growing up, you would classify were you an affluent family?
Yeah, absolutely. We were very comfortable and
Did you do like the teenage work flipping burgers or anything? Or
I had a couple part-time jobs. Worked at a I think clothing warehouse packing some stuff. I worked at a drugstore for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So just did the normal stuff.
And so when you go to university, are you paying for that, or was that paid for?
No, it was paid. Well, I live in Canada, so it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
Yeah.
a lot cheaper, but regardless, yeah, it was paid for. And
Until your family changed with your dad.
Well,
and so
it was paid for, and then starting in the first year university in the summer, I would go off to different cities to work in that kind of extended family business. So I worked in Kansas City for a couple months. I worked in Hong Kong. I worked in Taiwan. Those would be the 3 years, kind of just.
So were there family mentors as
Absolutely, there were lots, and so the first few years there were a lot of mentors that I'm sure just, you know, felt the responsibility to help me for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, gave me opportunities to, you know, at that time it was like fax, you know, fax machines
right.
and telex and that kind of stuff, you
Yeah.
know? So, and I would just write messages to save them from having to write it in Chinese and translate it. I would just write it for them. And so I think that was a way to really kind of just read and learn what was going on.
So your family, your relatives
Yeah.
are Chinese immigrants?
Only my immediate family. So my mom and dad and sister moved to Canada.
Okay.
And everybody else is still overseas. So everybody else is in Taiwan. Like my parents are from Taiwan.
Okay.
But now I have relatives scattered all over.
So I'm trying to get to, how do you get to, like, where does the motivation come from? Is this a cultural thing?
Oh.
You know, you're a rich kid and you kind of don't have to worry about anything. Is it the passing of your father? I mean, where does the motivation come in to? You go to school without a plan, you just go to school because you're supposed to go to school, right?
Right, yeah.
And then you start working and start getting mentored while you're in school.
Right.
Where does the work ethic show up? Is it modeled? Is it, you know, where do you think that comes from?
It's certainly modeled. I think certainly modeled directly from your family at first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my dad traveled a lot when I was younger, was working quite a bit, and I think that definitely impacts you. I think also, you know, when I graduated school, like some of the older family mentors in that extended family business, they really showed me, you know, work and a lot of, I'd say, client services. So, you know, I think being call it an Asian manufacturer building for mass retailers, a lot of the work was taking care of these buyers, making sure they got what they wanted in terms of product and pricing, and how do you service that business and negotiate, and how do you compete against others. So a lot of the modeling was based on, and as I mentioned, that kind of yearly pressure of line review and saying, you might lose this business. Doesn't matter how close, doesn't matter how big your business is, you're up for review again next year. And that continues, that feeling continues to this day. Absolutely. You know, I never take it for granted. And, you know, we still do line reviews with our retailers every year. So every year I tell my team to treat it like the last one. Because it's you know, it's easy to lose business and hard to get, right? That's for sure.
So, you know, when I talk to you, there's a casualness about how simple this is. And that casualness, I think, comes from, you know, 40 years of being involved in it, right? To me, it's like this marvel of, like, how does this thing get on my table? And you have such a casualness of, like, that this just you can do whatever you want to do. You can have this done. And so how do we explain to, you know, a 20-something that, you know, that to create something and to utilize, like, you're not going and turning the screwdriver on this and pouring the molds and stuff like that.
No.
But somebody has to put the pieces together.
Oh yeah.
And so I mean, how does that is it because of the family business that you were able to make that transition? Do you think somebody could do what you do just not being mentored that way?
Yeah, I think these days there's a lot more tools to do so. But certainly, of course, my background and history and all these people have helped. And today, it's obviously a big team that enables all of this to happen, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the first thing is getting a good team of experts that know how to do what they do and putting this together. And I think it's also kind of having the experience, and really it's a luxury to kind of map out what type of products that you want to build, right?
Do you think, like, let's just say your children.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, I'm always careful about this. I almost don't want to, like, give it up because, like, Chris is sitting here and he's the CFO and I want him to work with me.
Right.
Right. But there's certain people that are designed to take on your role or my role.
Right.
Right. And there are probably a lot of people that are stuck.
Right.
In a role that they don't belong, and they should be the aggregator. They should be the owner, the entrepreneur, the person.
Right.
Like how do you not? How do you think you don't get stuck in that? How do you know if that's you or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, I think that you have to have also the ability to take some of those risks and chances, right? I think that's one. You have to have the appetite to do so. I think that's actually the key. You have to be okay with the risk. You have to have that appetite. You have to have also maybe the environment to take that risk, meaning, one mistake's not going to put you out on the street. Although many entrepreneurs are in that situation, for sure. So if you have that appetite, then I think you just need to have that willingness to do it.
How important do you think self-awareness is? Because very few people are cut out to do something like what you do.
Huge. I think self-awareness is, not only is it like a big buzzword right now, but I also think it's true, right? It's hard to know yourself and your strengths and your weaknesses, and hard to come face to face with a lot of it and then push through it, right? And that's what you need a good team for. That's what you need family for, to tell you to put you in your place, when you get too high and all that stuff. So self-awareness is key.
So this is a long tail for me to get to this, which I found very fascinating on our first conversation about a philosophy that you have in raising children.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember this conversation, you had said a comment to me that you were telling your son,
right,
that we are staying at this hotel, we're eating this dinner, and you had talked about how this is my life, not yours.
Yeah, I think what we try to impress upon them, and that's my wife and myself, obviously, a lot of this wisdom comes from her for sure, but it really is about, I think the challenge is, and we talked at length about this, right, is, your kids, my kids, get to grow up in a way that we probably didn't.
Yes.
And we are likely unwilling to go on vacation and stay at the Red Roof Inn to try to instill some strange, phony value.
Right.
But that's
some scarcity modeling, right?
Which is
pretend models, and then you're pretending for them.
Which is, I think that's not credible, and it's not fair, and all that stuff. And so I think there is a bit of, I think, to be fair, you have to let them know that there's a certain effort and sacrifice and a certain decisions need to be made to sustain this lifestyle that they have. And I think to pretend that doing normal things will result in that, I think that's not a good lesson to give, right? I think to be more realistic, to say, we all live a very fortunate life, and we all live, very well, and so forth. And this is not trying to, it's not trying to say that, that they have to live it this way or not. It's just more being clear about, what it takes to live that life.
Yes.
And just being very upfront about that. And making it just part of daily conversation, as opposed to avoiding it, or as opposed to even just saying, oh, you got to really work hard and save your money, because that's just very arbitrary. What does that even mean? And it can mean so many different things to so many different people depending on your situation, because
means you could work yourself to death 100 hours a week at $9 an hour.
Right. What does that mean? Right.
Right.
And
it's not going to get you very far.
It's certainly it's not going to get you a GT3 RS. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or, and again, it's that line. It's not about actually saying that you have to have a GT3 RS to be happy. Right.
Certainly not.
But it's more about saying, if that's what you want, let's be real about what it takes to get there, and let's be real about what it means to have that stuff and what the sacrifices are and all that.
And that's what I'm getting at with this discussion around self-awareness. I mean,
Right.
and you have to, like, I didn't spend a lot of time in my younger days really sitting down, like, what do I actually want?
Right.
What am I willing to do to get that?
Right.
Like, I feel like I could do a lot more and I would have a lot more, but I don't really want any more, or I don't want that right now, and I'm not willing to do what it takes to get something right now. And so one of the things you and I talked a lot about, family and children,
right.
and what do you teach them about, and I also feel a real responsibility for a lot of the younger males that are
Right.
watching me almost there could be a misconstrued flaunting of, because I'm chasing all these products and I'm chasing a fancy whatever, or fancy car, or like that fancy helmet over there on the wall.
Right.
Like that's really not what it's about for me, and I'm not careful. My kids are going to see an improper modeling. These young men are going to see a very improper modeling, and it's just that comment really resonated with me when you're eating some fancy sushi in downtown Toronto and a skyrise that you worked your butt off, and the bill's going to be $400, but that your kids understand that this is not.
Well, I tell you, it's not fair. And the reason I say it's not fair is because, like I said, we're not going to go stay at the Red Roof, right? We're just not. So to then all of a sudden not realize that we have normalized this for them.
Yeah.
Right? So then you also then have to normalize hard work. Then you also have to normalize what it takes to have that. And my
smart work,
and smart work,
yeah.
And my son is very, very aware of this. He works very, very hard. He's very he's very sharp. He's such a great kid. And he asks a lot of questions about money, but not in how much, like,
what does that cost, Dad?
It's not like that. It's more about and especially recently, understanding how it all works, and what does this, because he's going to university in the fall, and so how does that work? What does this kind of job equate to? What kind of life is that? So these are the relevant questions.
And that's the driver, I think, to no matter who you are, how old you are, is that the more inquisitive you are, the more intention you put into that questioning, that challenging of the status quo. Like I try to instill in all the guys that do work for me. I don't think any of them really cut out. They don't want what comes with what I have to do, right? They don't. That's why they're here.
Right.
They want me to fall on that sword so that they can carve out their path. But I also want them to be able to come to me and say, "Hey, I think if we did this, this, and this, I think we can do this, this, and that." Not just be pigeonholed to, well, Matt's only going to pay me, the $38,000 a year, and I just got to wait for him to decide to give me a raise, instead of coming and saying, "Hey, here's what I think I can do, because here's where I think I want to go."
Right.
And a lot of that sometimes requires questions. Say, Matt, where do you think we're headed? And so I do attempt to do that with my children. They're a little young still to start to head down these conversation paths, but I'm just I wonder how other people think about it. And I just thought you had such a unique perspective on all of that, and how that works. And it's not just your own children; it's just anybody that you model or mentor in your life.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge sometimes, because again, I go back to sometimes I certainly am guilty of having, call it, negative reactions sometimes, because I didn't grow up that way, right? I didn't grow up wealthy, I didn't grow up, and it could be cultural, it could be situational, whatever. And sometimes I do catch myself with these reactions. But again, I try to step back, or my wife makes me step back, and kind of realize that, you know, it is of my own doing.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, because it obviously affords you other opportunities and other perspectives.
We're in such an interesting spot because we're transitioning from that taker of knowledge to the potential modeler of wisdom. Right. But we're in purgatory there. We're in the middle. At least I feel that way, that I'm kind of in the middle, and I don't know what to do. I feel like an infant in a new position, in a new place in life. Right. And that place has a great responsibility. And that great responsibility is for your own children, your own siblings, but, you know, your people that work with you or for you, and then in my case, this vast audience that's, you know, watching what I'm doing. Yeah. And they're watching me do it. Everybody's watching me do it, and I don't know what I'm doing. Right, and this transition from the pursuit of knowledge to now the purveyor of some of that, to the holder of some of that, is such a weird place to be. And when I still feel like I'm a kid. Yeah, listen, if most people that have known me for a long time they'd say I'm the last person to go on a podcast or be on videos. You know? Right. So I think we're all learning this is kind of the new digital age. Yeah. But I also think there's some, like you mentioned it before, right? There's some therapy to it, right? There's some beauty to put this stuff out in the world, and then you're now holding yourself to account for it too, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's an interesting time for sure. So Chris, do you have any interesting questions that?
I do. I've collected some questions here.
Less deep than these.
Yes.
And what I'm doing here is, you know, I find you fascinating, and I want people to understand, you know, that there is a method to some of my madness here. On when I pitched the VE52, and I was very, very forward and very upfront, saying, "Look, you idiots, you know, don't." You listen to me. I wanted people to listen to me. It's funny when people that aren't bought in, they see this like, this guy doesn't treat his customers right. Right. So, well, I'm doing this intentionally, and I want people to understand the reason I'm asking you some of these really esoteric questions about you and your life, and that this is something different, something special. There's a nuance to this side of product development. And I would argue that there's someone like you behind almost anything. For sure. And so when you just start crapping on stuff, now I crap on stuff more than anybody, but it's there's a lot that goes into pretty much everything that exists. Oh, yes. And somebody has to take a risk to do it. Oh, yes. And that story is, I think, important to tell. So anyway, Chris, what kind of questions did you have?
For the record, I stayed at Red Roof on Wednesday night in Tampa. It was awful, but it was just me and my buddy, and I would never subject my family to that. But for one night only, it wasn't terrible.
I used to stay at the Red Roof all the time in Detroit.
Oh man!
When I called on Kmart, so you know,
it's quite a place.
Part of the journey.
Let's see. Do we have a date for, first of all, pre-order? And second of all, if we're doing a pre-order, which I assume we are. And second of all, is there an ETA for actual delivery of this to us/customers?
We're hoping, without any further delays in China, hopefully to get in country by the end of July.
Okay. And then you know what I start thinking, Chris? So let's take the money. Right. Let's get the people the ability to lock their spot down, and then with the risk that it shows up screwed up, or shows up not quite right, or shows up pink. Right. I just know that me as a consumer, as a purchaser, I'm willing to take the risk. Even though sometimes I look stupid when I do a pre-order and it doesn't show up when I said it would, or it shows up and it's not quite right. I just know that I would rather the opportunity as a consumer to let me just buy it. And then, you know, if it doesn't work out, I'm not going to get all bent out of shape about it, but I at least want a shot. Right. And so I'm always a big proponent of, and the problem is all the guys here then have to deal with that fallout. Yeah. Okay. When something doesn't show up for 6 months and everybody's saying, where's my stuff? But I think that we'll probably turn this on. We'll be taking some pictures next week, maybe sometime next week. Actually, I guess we can't turn it on until we know what it costs yet. So we got to figure that out. So maybe a couple of weeks before we have pre-order.
Yep.
Okay.
And then we'll set it up and wait until people see the video. We'll probably have that up early next week.
Awesome.
It did
it's gonna break the
destroyed. Yeah. Absolutely. It looks like a little piece of crap. It looks cool, but when you touch it and feel, you're like, "There's this little thing isn't gonna frickin' do squat," and it just absolutely decimates. It is the biggest numbers I've ever seen of any pressure washer, outside of like a 20 amp 240 volt monster, and even that, it's chasing that down. It is that frickin' insane.
That was one of the other questions about specs and performance, but that's coming in the video, right? The details.
Yeah,
numbers
what do I care? It's going to do, so with a 7.0 nozzle, it did 2.4 gallons a minute at 1,010 PSI.
Like something silly.
That's crazy.
2.4 gallons per minute. To put that into perspective, the Krenzla, K1322 TS at like 975 PSI does 1.88 or 1.9 gallons a minute. So this is going to be somewhere in the $300 to $400 range, and it did 2.4 gallons a minute at 1,000 psi. Now, I think the sweet spot is probably 2.2 gallons a minute with a 6.0 nozzle at like 1,100 psi. When we did the full spec, it did 1.88 gallons a minute at 1,500 psi. Was when we put like the on the low range of a recommended nozzle, and by the way, it did 2.4 gallons a minute at 9.8 amps, so drawing very little power.
I think you're getting probably higher numbers here than we get in our lab. Our lab is controlled for straight, the standard water inlet pressure, standard amperage, and so forth, standard power. But what we were saying in the video, and it's the most important thing for people to understand, is it's relative performance, right? So everybody's inputs are going to be different.
Yeah, you might have a different pressure gauge. Or
everybody's power is going to be different.
You started your stopwatch late or early.
Exactly, right? But what you can be sure of is that relative to any other unit that you're going to use on your specific circuit, this is going to outperform by a large degree.
And will it be sold washer alone, or does it come with hose, gun, etc.?
Right now, it comes with everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Is it serviceable? You guys answered that already. No.
It's not.
Okay. Will the VE56 still be sold, or is this replacing that?
The VE52 is the current.
52, sorry.
Right. It's going to be sold alongside of it.
Yeah, because that's $100 or $229 bucks or something. So it's a different price point.
That's right.
Okay. Let's see. Will you ship to Germany? Will this work in Germany?
Right now, it will not work in Germany because it's a different voltage, but we are working. I was over in Europe last month setting up kind of a strategy for Europe, and I'll be in Australia in July setting up distribution there. So for those in those markets, hopefully you'll see one soon.
All right, Aaron wants to know, when is the active snub nose gun being released? Is it out yet? Does it come with this? What's the story there?
There was a desire on our part to come out with the snub nose gun, our own kind of foam cannon, and this at the same time. The gun, unfortunately, is being caught up in the Shanghai lockdown. So the tooling is being opened. So the plan for the gun is the tooling is being opened in Shanghai, but the gun itself will be made in Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but the tooling hasn't been able to they haven't been able to work on it for the past month and a half because of the lockdowns in Shanghai. So it's gotten delayed because of that.
All right, this is a super chat from Rob, $6.99 Canadian. This may have been discussed already, but if not, can you talk about the differences between this one and the VE52?
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different pump. So again, this was designed with longevity in mind. So the pump and the motor last about double what's on the market. So any of your Karchers, Sun Joes, and so forth, they're rated at about 100 hours. This is tested for over 200. So there were a ton of changes made in the pump, materials, seals, and a little bit in the design. The winding of the motor is different to again, promote that longevity. And the way, again, it's tuned, running at lower amperage and so forth, all that is meant to have it perform for longer. So those are the key differences between this and the V52. The V52 is still going to get you great numbers. It's still going to perform really well. We've addressed some of the issues with the longer hose and the surging and so forth. This is just for that customer that wants more, values longevity, and those are the main differences.
Will this one be easier to wall mount? I know something was replaced, so we don't have to use an elbow or something, right?
Correct. So the inlet and outlet are in the proper position, so that way you can mount on an 8-inch deep shelf, and then you don't have to worry about putting 90-degree elbows and stuff like that on. It'd be much easier to set up, just like the Krenzla and the AR.
Gordon in the chat has a question. Hey, Matt and James, I'm currently using a VE52, which I love. In efforts to help reduce noise during use, I have a cardboard box over the unit. Do I need to be concerned about any overheating issues?
You may. I mean, it depends how close it is to the vents and so forth. So, again, not recommended. But, unfortunately, a universal motor spins at a much higher rate and just sounds whiny. That's just the way these motors are.
Yep.
And the reason we use them is because they're a lot lighter and cheaper than an equivalent induction motor. Lighter by more than half.
Yep.
And smaller. That's how you get this form factor. So that's a great example of a design decision that is rooted in not only performance but cost and form factors and all that stuff. To reduce the sound, I really don't know what we've actually done this stuff in the past where we've tried to add insulation to the motor to decrease the whine, but again, I don't think it's very effective.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. In the chat here, Rad wants to know, will this be released in Canada at the same time under the Simonized brand?
No, this will not be released under the Simonized brand yet. We actually have a super cool lineup coming for 2023 in Canada under the Simonized brand. I think there's four new units and actually 2 new gas units. So we've actually just finished testing and production of our 5-piston pump onto a gas engine.
Interesting.
And the numbers are crazy. The numbers are amazing. And so there's a lot of exciting products coming out for Canadian Tire under the Simonized brand. All of it will be transitioned. I believe all of the units will be transitioned to a 5-piston pump by next year. With different form factors, different types of convenience features, different things like that. They're going to use a version of our snub nose gun on one of the gas units. Mm-hmm. So you begin to see it's an interesting retail thing. You begin to see some of the stuff that we've worked on and learned and gotten feedback from the community start to filter into kind of the retail assortment. So now I'm able to go back to some of their product team or brand team and say, look, this is what the enthusiast community is looking for. We should incorporate some of these elements into the Simonized line. And then you kind of have data to show them that this is, we should do this or that. So this unit in specific will not, but elements of everything we've been learning will begin to show up in pieces in the Simonized program in 2023.
All right, so we talked about North America, Europe. Widigdia in the chat wants to know, why don't you hit the Asian market, or is that anytime planned in the future?
It is planned, actually. Okay. So I think we plan to hit Australia. That's sometimes considered Asia, but more I guess into 2023, 2024. We are kind of in the beginning stages of building and partnering to build a factory in Thailand right now. And that will be specifically for a lot of the Asian market. China is already very saturated with pressure washers. You want to talk about a market that has a ton of brands? China's got a ton of domestic pressure washer brands. It's actually a fascinating market. And it's a very different model anyways. But for Southeast Asia, it's also a huge market, but different voltages and distribution challenges and so forth. And the Thailand facility will be more geared towards servicing that market, as well as hopefully the U.S. market because of the duties that we have coming in from China. So that, we hope to have something online by 2023.
All right, Nate wants to know what's the noise level of this pressure washer versus the Krenzler or AR.
So we did a SPL test. This one tested at 72, 73 dB versus I think the quietest machine is the K1622. It's something like 68 or something, and I believe the 1322 is around 70. So it's 2 to 3 dB louder.
Yeah.
Than the Krenzler.
Well, let's be honest. It's only 2 to 3 dB louder, but it doesn't sound as nice.
Yeah, it's a different. It's got the
whine.
the Chinese whine to it. Yeah.
And that's the motor, right? So the
Yeah.
Krenzler operates, and the Krenzler has what we call a low speed induction, right? Which runs at a much lower speed, so it hums as opposed to whines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gives it a more pleasing sound. It's just lower, not as high pitched. It just sounds better. But that's just a consequence of the motor that we chose to use.
Yeah, and the weight. I mean, the thing weighs 80 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, this thing weighs what, 25 pounds? I don't even know.
Yeah,
Not even 20
Yeah.
pounds. Not even probably. So
It's pretty
again,
light.
those are all the kind of consequences of the design decisions.
But I think in comparison to gas, I mean, I think it's something you can still, if you had it in your garage and you ran your hose out your garage door, you could run it at 6 a.m. and your neighbors aren't really going to care.
Yeah, I don't think it's not nothing compared to a gas unit.
Yeah. Yep.
Speaking of which, Rob in the chat wants to know if you'll eventually make a gas model that does not come with all the extra retail add-ons.
Yeah. So the challenge with gas pressure washers, and we build a ton of gas units today. The challenge with gas units is the service element. So now you're dealing with a gas engine that is 100% serviceable.
Yep.
And if you sell a gas engine product, the way we like to go to market is we like to offer the appropriate support and customer support and service. So once you start getting into the gas game, you want to offer a network of service because that user typically wants to repair their unit.
Yeah.
And then of course the whole decision around which engine, what levels and so forth. So in Canada, we do have a full service network that repairs our units. That was required under the kind of dealing with Canadian Tire and Simonize. So that is fully set up. In the U.S., we've toyed with it, but maybe we'll change our mind seeing the results of the 5-piston and gas. I think right now it's just not the time for us.
All right, I got a couple non-pressure washer questions here we got to get to before we close things up here. MB says, this is a good idea for you, Matt. Can we please get a wash and talk with Mike F. washing his F80 M3 or his truck, either here or inside the Hex? I think that would be epic.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll sit on a chair and let Mike wash his car and let somebody else work the camera. That'll be great.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Good job, MB. Thank you for that. Dylan claims it's his birthday today. He's turning 31, so happy birthday,
I
Dylan.
don't care.
I knew Matt would appreciate that as well. Let's see.
He's a grown man. He doesn't need to be a freaking baby.
Yeah, that's it. That's all we got for today. Good timing.
Shoot, there was something else I wanted to see if it comes back.
Yeah, well, there was one other super chat I'll get to while you're thinking. Hey, Matt, hope all is well. Have you ever thought about chasing men's grooming products and developing an OG-approved spec line for grooming,
not.
beard shaving, and so
Yeah,
forth?
Definitely not.
He's not much of a groomer, Brian.
Look at me. Yeah, I'm a darn.
Does that look like a man you take grooming advice from?
Yeah, no. Although, I was talking to a company that does fragrances for the home to give a signature scent.
There you go.
So, I poo-poo certain things, but then other weird things, I'm all in. So it just depends. So anyway, we're going to keep working. As you can tell, we're going to keep developing.
Yeah.
And the team at Active is fantastic. So my young fantastic guys work with your young fantastic
absolutely.
guys, and then
Absolutely.
we sit down and pretend like we did it all.
We did everything. Yeah.
We did it, man.
That's right.
And I think that this inside of like niche like pressure washing, there's ways to use passion and channel that passion to make some cool stuff.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll come down when we have the next few products in the pipeline and do this again.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. Well, thanks for being so candid and sharing with us. We'll have, if you guys want, we'll have James on again and talk more about life and philosophy and business and and tell you more about how we don't know what to do in life, just like the rest of us.
Absolutely.
We're all just trying to figure it out.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll